2001: A Space Odyssey was directed by Stanley Kubrick and was released in 1968. Okay, so 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of the most iconic movies ever made. If it weren't for this movie, a lot of sci-fi movies that we get nowadays wouldn't exist. For a movie that was made in the late 1960s, it still holds up incredibly well to this day. So what exactly is the story of 2001: A Space Odyssey? Well, it's actually kinda complicated. It's a very mysterious movie. You're not quite sure what the story is, but that's what makes it great. When 2001 first came out back in 1968, critics were really mixed on it, and I completely understand why. 2001 is one of those movies that has a really complex hidden message to it, and it definitely requires multiple viewings in order to really understand it. And I completely understand why critics didn't like it when it first came out, because 2001 came out during a time period where movies had cohesive stories, and 2001 wasn't a movie that had a legit cohesive story to it, but that's what makes it a classic. Just like with The Wizard of Oz and Star Wars and Jurassic Park, 2001 was revolutionary when it first came out. It was ahead of its time. It was groundbreaking. And the visual effects in 2001 are some of the best I've ever seen in any movie I have seen in my entire life. For a movie that was made in 1968, just like what I said earlier, it holds up incredibly well, and it holds up better than some movies that have been released recently. The Stargate scene in 2001 is probably my favorite scene in the entire movie. The score in that scene is also so chillin' and so intense. And speaking of the score, the soundtrack in 2001 is absolutely fantastic. Just like with Disney's Fantasia, it incorporates classical music so well that it's basically telling the story. And of course, I can't talk about 2001: A Space Odyssey without talking about everyone's favorite supercomputer, HAL 9000. And just a heads up, if you haven't seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, I'm about to go into spoiler territory, so you've been warned. HAL 9000 is one of the creepiest villains in movie history. The second the twist happens and he turns into the villain, that's when 2001 flips into a completely different movie. A twist involving a supercomputer that turns into a villain. Gee, that sounds oddly familiar, doesn't it? So overall, guys, 2001: A Space Odyssey, what else can you say about it? It's one of my all-time favorite movies. It's a timeless classic. If it weren't for 2001, we wouldn't have Star Wars or basically sci-fi. If you haven't seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, I highly recommend checking it out. I give 2001: A Space Odyssey an A+. So if you have seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, what are your thoughts on it? Whatever your thoughts are, just leave your comment in the comments below. And if you want to see more of my videos, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more great content.